My name is Dahlia Reeves, and the day my parents handed my sister a check for $10 million, they looked at me like I was the help who had overstayed her welcome. We were sitting in the back conference room of Montclair and Keene, a law office too glossy for grief. The long table reflected the overhead lights so cleanly, it made everything feel artificial, especially the moment my mother turned to me and said, with her softest voice, "Go earn your own, sweetheart." I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just stared at the blank sheet of paper inside my envelope, pretending I didn't hear my sister giggle something about waterfront properties as she clutched her check like a wedding bouquet. No one asked why I got nothing. No one blinked. I drove home that night with the heat turned off and both windows cracked, just to stay awake. There was a single voicemail waiting for me, from my cousin. It said, "Tough luck. D." Guess Grandpa changed his mind, but he hadn't. 6 weeks later, a man in a charcoal suit knocked on my door and said 12 words that shifted the ground under everything I thought I'd lost. "Miss Reeves, I'm the court-appointed executor of the real will." And just like that, the silence broke. I didn't sleep that night. The paper was still on my kitchen table, folded once, perfectly blank, like someone had meant to print something but gave up halfway. I stared at it under the yellow light of the overhead lamp, daring it to change, to show something, anything. My name, a line, a mistake. But there was nothing, just silence, white and absolute. I'd always known I wasn't their favorite. I wasn't the polished one, the marketable daughter, the kind who smiled on cue and never asked too many questions. I was the one who stayed late at Grandpa's house after everyone else had left. The one who helped him wrap gauze around his hands when his arthritis flared. The one who sat cross-legged in the attic, cataloging his old tools while he told me stories from the war. But those stories didn't make it into the obituary. Neither did I. The week after the will reading, I made calls to the law office, to the family accountant, to the retirement fund manager I found in Grandpa's old Rolodex. No one answered. No one returned messages. When I tried to visit the attorney who'd handled the reading, I found a locked door and a mailbox stuffed with unopened envelopes. A woman from the front desk of another suite said the firm had relocated under confidential terms, whatever that meant. I started wondering if I'd made it all up. The fishing trips, the garage projects, the time he gave me a compass and said, "If the world turns you around, at least this will keep you honest." Maybe I'd dreamed it all into being. After all, if a man truly loved you, would he let his name be used to erase you? Then came the first real sign that something was wrong. A family friend I hadn't spoken to in years, Mr. Bramley, an old neighbor from Grandpa's street, called me by accident. He thought he'd reached my aunt. We exchanged awkward hellos, the kind you give when you aren't sure what the other person knows. Before hanging up, he said, "Your granddad mentioned something about sealing the will. Said he wanted to make sure no one messed with the paperwork." Smart man. I sat straight up. Sealed. I'd heard the term before. A sealed will wasn't read at a family gathering with wine and laughter. It wasn't photocopied and casually handed out like party favors. A sealed will required a court petition, a judge's approval, and usually a damn good reason. And for Grandpa, I could think of one. He knew. He'd seen the way they smiled with closed mouths and colder hands. He'd heard the rehearsed gratitude, the sudden interest in legacy right after the diagnosis. He knew they would try to take what wasn't theirs. And maybe he had left something behind for the one person who never asked. It happened on a Thursday morning, too early for bad news, too quiet for anything good. The apartment smelled like burnt toast, and the radiator had been clicking since 5:30. Mom. I was still in sweatpants, holding a chipped mug of coffee I couldn't afford to refill, when I heard the knock. 3 times. Slow, deliberate. Not the kind of knock you ignore. I pulled the door open halfway, already rehearsing a polite no to whatever he was selling. But the man on the other side wasn't holding brochures. He wasn't smiling, either. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, carried a battered leather briefcase, and his voice was steady in a way that made my heart drop before he even said anything. "Miss Reeves," he said, "I'm John Alden. I was appointed by the county probate court to execute Franklin Reeves's sealed will. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. That maybe he meant reviewed, retrieved, or any other word that didn't punch a hole through everything I'd come to believe. You have the wrong person," I said automatically, but he didn't even blink. "No?" he said. "I don't." I let him in. The apartment was embarrassingly small, but he didn't seem to notice the peeling paint or the stack of overdue bills beside the microwave. He walked to the small dining table like he'd done this 100 times, placed his briefcase down, and carefully unclasped it. From inside, he pulled out 2 documents, one sealed with a court insignia, the other eerily familiar. "This one," he said, tapping the sealed document, "is the official will, filed 6 weeks before Mr. Reeves passed. It was processed through a confidential channel due to concerns over potential interference." He looked up. "Concerns which, I'm afraid, turned out to be valid." I reached for the other paper. It was the fake will, the one they read, the one that erased me. My hands began to shake. "They forged it," I asked. John's voice didn't change. "They did more than forge it. They buried you." John laid the documents side by side like a quiet indictment. I couldn't take my eyes off the forged will. The signature at the bottom was close, practiced, but the flourish on the F was too clean. Grandpa's hand used to tremble slightly toward the end. "This one didn't. They used a dead notary," he said. "Passed away 2 years before this document was allegedly signed." I stared at the stamp. Official. Convincing. Completely worthless. John continued, unbothered by the growing stillness in the room. "We traced the submission through a private courier. The paperwork bypassed standard channels and was filed by someone with no verifiable connection to your grandfather, likely hired to look legitimate. It would have slipped through if not for one thing. What I asked." He pulled out a USB drive and placed it between us. "Mr. Reeves filed a secondary affidavit. Unusual, but legal. He left specific instructions that the original sealed will was not to be replaced or amended under any circumstance. That trigger created an internal conflict in the court system when the fake will was pushed through. That's how we found it." I didn't speak. I couldn't. Then he opened a slim black folder. "Here's the list of assets connected to the sealed will," he said, and turned it toward me. I saw numbers, parcel IDs, business shares, estate holdings I hadn't known existed. Then, one line Dahlia Reeves, 45% controlling interest in Reeves Tool and Restoration, Inc. My throat closed. "They said the company was sold," I whispered. "My mother said it was liquidated to cover Grandpa's care." John gave the smallest of nods. "Except your grandfather never signed the liquidation paperwork. That signature was forged, too." I blinked hard, trying to ground myself in the scratchy fabric of the chair beneath me. None of this felt real, and yet, it was. Every lie they told about the company, the inheritance, even his funeral, it all formed a single, deliberate picture. "They didn't just cut me out," I said quietly. John looked at me, calm and clear-eyed. "No," he said. "They erased you, on paper, in court, in memory, but not anymore." The notice went out on a Monday. By Tuesday morning, my phone was buzzing like it owed someone money. Missed calls, voicemails, a message from Mitchell that started out cocky and ended in panic. One from my aunt, long and rambling, begging me not to drag the family through this. But none of them said the one thing that mattered. Not a single one said, "We're sorry." Then my mother came. She didn't call ahead. She just showed up, white blouse, soft perfume, a thermos of her famous cinnamon tea, like she'd come to visit her favorite daughter for a chat. She stood on my porch for a long time, her smile carefully pinned in place. "Dahlia," she said through the screen door, "we should talk. We're still family." I stood just out of view, My hands were steady. My voice wasn't angry. "No," I said. She blinked. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." I didn't move. Behind me, John leaned against the hallway wall, arms folded. He didn't say a word, but I could feel the weight of his presence anchoring me. "The investigation is open now. He told me earlier, don't engage, not until it's done." My mother's fingers trembled around the thermos, just enough to look vulnerable, but the eyes, that same calculating shine I'd grown up with, never changed. She had always known how to make her cruelty look like love. "Please," she tried again, voice softening. "It didn't have to go this way." I took a breath, but it did. I replied. The porch stayed quiet. No apology came, no confession, just a long, practiced sigh before she turned and walked back to the car. The same car she'd driven to the will, reading where she'd handed my sister a check and told me to earn my own. She hadn't changed, but I had. I closed the door behind her, not with finality, not with fury, just with peace, because I finally understood not every locked door is meant to be reopened. The vault was in a downtown bank, First Liberty Trust, the kind with marble floors and gold trim that always made me feel like I didn't belong. John had already arranged the appointment. When we arrived, the branch manager escorted us to a private room in the back, then returned a few minutes later with a safe deposit box registered under my grandfather's name. The handwriting on the form was unmistakable. When I opened the box, my breath caught. Inside was a sealed envelope, a folded legal document, and a small flash drive wrapped in a cloth handkerchief. John didn't touch anything. He simply nodded for me to proceed. I opened the letter first. The paper was thick, textured, the ink slightly smudged in the corners. Grandpa's handwriting, sharp, deliberate, slightly slanted, filled the page like a voice from the past. "If you're reading this, Dally, then they did exactly what I feared." I sat down. He wrote about the way he'd seen them circling his estate like birds sensing blood, about how they had started calling more often, bringing cookies they never baked, asking about power of attorney under the guise of just in case. He'd known. He'd seen their performance. "You never asked me for anything," he wrote. "That's why I left you everything they tried to smile their way into." I didn't cry right away. I just sat there, the words sinking in like warmth into cold skin. The kind of validation no court order could give. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't mistaken. I was protected. Then I opened the flash drive. There were recordings, one in particular, labeled Consultant. It was a conversation between my uncle and a man with a clipped accent. They discussed falsifying cognitive evaluations, faking legal notices, staging Grandpa's mental decline so any objection could be dismissed as confusion. I didn't know whether to scream or sit perfectly still. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated erasure. John didn't say much on the way out. He didn't have to. The evidence would speak for itself. It already had. That night, I reread the letter 3 times, and each time, the same sentence broke something open in me. "I left you the keys. Dally. Now show them what doors they were never meant to touch." 3 weeks later, I walked into the probate courtroom wearing a black suit that didn't quite fit and shoes that had seen better days. But I walked in standing tall. I wasn't here to plead. I wasn't here to perform. I was here to end the silence. The gallery was quiet. My mother sat 2 rows behind the counsel tables, her pearls tight against her throat. My uncle whispered to a man in a gray blazer who wouldn't meet my eyes. Mitchell looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tan had faded, and the watch he'd once bragged about on social media was gone. I sat beside John at the petitioner's table. He opened his file slowly, deliberately, like a man who'd waited long enough to be heard. The judge entered, a tall woman with eyes that missed nothing. What followed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. No one shouted. No one cried out. But it was devastating in its precision. John presented the forged will and the notarization tied to a deceased certifier. He played the recording of the conversation between my uncle and the consultant. He submitted the real will, the sealed affidavit, the bank records, and my grandfather's letter filed under personal designation, not legally binding but impossible to ignore. The judge listened. She asked questions. She nodded slowly, like someone piecing together a story she'd heard too many times before. When the ruling came, it was swift. The forged will was invalidated. The sealed will reinstated. All asset transfers frozen. The court ordered a full audit of the estate, and with a measured voice, the judge looked at me and said, "Miss Reeves, the court recognizes you as the primary beneficiary." Behind me, Mitchell let out a choked breath. My mother didn't move. My uncle's attorney closed his notebook without a word. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply exhaled. As I stood to leave, John touched my arm and handed me a folded slip of paper. "Your grandfather left one more thing," he said. It was handwritten. 4 words, no seal, no date. Dahlia Reeves, sole trustee. They had tried to write me out. And now, I was the only name left standing. I returned to the cabin 3 days after the ruling. The land was still there, 42 acres of sloping fields and stubborn pine, unchanged by lawsuits or betrayal. The air smelled like damp earth and dry cedar. I hadn't been back since the funeral, not really. Not as someone who belonged. The key turned stiffly in the lock. Inside, the dust had settled like silence across every surface. I didn't rush to clean it. I walked the room slowly instead, touching the things he left behind. His compass, his oil lamp, a photograph of me at 8 years old, holding up a fishing line, beaming, with a gap-toothed smile and muddy boots. I sat down in his old leather chair and listened to the wind outside. It didn't sound like accusation anymore. It sounded like memory. For weeks, I stayed there. I didn't post anything. I didn't return messages. I let the world adjust without me. I rebuilt what needed rebuilding, mostly small things. A loose floorboard, a broken hinge. I read through Grandpa's old journals, filled with diagrams, sketches, thoughts about repair and decay, and how some things only stay standing if someone keeps showing up. And eventually, I did. I met with the board of Reeves Tool and Restoration, quiet men in clean suits who didn't recognize me at first, until I placed the letter on the table and said simply, "This is my name now." They didn't argue, not because I was powerful, but because I no longer flinched. In time, I reopened the workshop, not to grow it into something massive, not to prove anything, just to remind myself that the things worth keeping craft, truth, legacy don't need applause to be real. I never returned their calls. Not my cousins, not my aunts, not my mother's. They had said I didn't need anything. They were right. I didn't need their approval, their explanations, or their rewritten memories. I just needed the space they tried so hard to take away. And now it was mine. I never went back to the house where my mother once kept my childhood photos in a shoebox labeled "Later." I never opened the messages that came months later, disguised as updates, invitations, or guilt. I didn't block them. I didn't respond. I just let them drift into silence. Because by then, I understood something I hadn't before. Justice doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it comes quietly through a court order, through a sealed letter written in crooked handwriting, through the stillness that settles after the truth is no longer up for debate. I didn't win by destroying them. I won by stepping outside the narrative they tried to trap me in. For years, I held my tongue, smiled at holidays, laughed at cruel jokes I didn't find funny, tried to become someone lovable enough to keep. But silence isn't love. Silence is survival. And I don't owe anyone my survival story. Grandpa used to say, "Dignity is what you do when no one's looking." And maybe that's what this really was, not revenge, not redemption, just a quiet reclamation of my name, of my space, of my right to remember. The company operates smaller now, but clean. The land stays wild, except for a patch I cleared near the cabin, just enough for low pine and clover. Grandpa once told me those roots hold the earth when storms come. And some days, sitting on the porch, I swear I can still hear him. In the rustle of leaves, in the creak of the old wood under my boots, in the quiet way the wind moves between trees that never needed permission to stay standing. They lied. They schemed. They erased and rewrote. But in the end, they lost the one thing they fought hardest to keep: control. And I didn't need to punish them to take it back. I didn't need their apology. Because the truth, undeniable, unedited, was enough. And now, it's mine. It always was.